Okay, here's a quick video about how to print something with a Turnigy Mini Fabrikator V2 using Cura. So the first thing we need is a model to put in here. So let's go to Thingiverse and let's get a coin trap. Let's go with this one. Now we click Thing Files, and here is the .stl file. We're going to download that, which should go to our downloads. And now we're going to switch back to Cura and hit Open File. You can either click this button or you can click File, Open Files. And then in your Downloads folder, you will see what you want. Day 1 Coin Trap is what it was called. And we click Open. There it is. Nice. So if we roll up and down on the mouse wheel, we can zoom in and out. And if we hold the right mouse button and go side to side, we can pan around and look at it. And if you want to adjust what the camera's looking at, which seems to be right about here, you can click the mouse wheel down and move that. And that will translate, instead of rotate, that'll translate everything around. You can put that where you're actually looking. And then your orbit follows that point a little bit better. Now Cura has this neat feature in solid view where overhang or areas of concern are in red. And if we change to layer view, we can see what the lines actually look like. Now this part will print perfectly fine without support material, but I want to take a moment to talk about the different types of support material. So in order for this to be useful, I need to rotate this block a little bit. There we go. So now it's on its edge. You would never print like this. This makes no sense. We should print it flat like we had it before. But I can show you about support material. So we're looking through the bottom here, and there's only a very, very small contact area. So this would easily get knocked off the build plate during the print. If we change to solid view, the default view will see all this red, and you'll see that this side is red because it's at a really steep angle, and this side is not red because it's close enough to vertical that it'll have no problem with it. So this is a nice way of identifying problem areas. Now let's change support material and turn that on. So if we go to support, the first thing you do is you check this checkbox to turn it on, and we have a couple options. So the first option is touching build plate. The second option is everywhere. So touching build plate means that it'll only make support if it can come down and touch the build plate, like right here. It'll come down and touch the build plate. This red part right here can't come down and touch the build plate. If it comes straight down, it's going to touch the bottom of this circle right here. Now you don't see the support material unless you change this to layer view, and then you can see it. So this is only printing support material if it can come down and touch the build plate. Now this has some really cool things. You can print things that have a lot of curves, and it also helps to increase how much footprint the object has. So here's the first layer, and you can see that all of a sudden there's a lot more footprint now. So you actually probably could print the cube on its edge like this. It'd be interesting to try. And it would only waste about 16 cents worth of plastic. So most filament is about 2 cents per gram, and we see that this is about 8 grams, so 16 cents worth of plastic to print this object. And we can see how it prints. Now that support material right here has to start from the very bottom and work its way all the way to the top, where it finally grabs on to the object to support it. And if you notice, oh, here's a good angle, you can see a little bit of a gap right here. And that gap disappears when you actually print the filament on there because it falls down until it touches something, but it's enough of a gap to help separate these two things pretty easily. Now let's say for some reason we wanted to actually have support material inside this circle. It'll print fine without it, but for some reason we wanted to support this because sometimes it can look a little ugly right there. In that case, we would change this to everywhere, and that supports every red area that we saw earlier in the model. and you'll see that there's now support coming down and supporting this part of the circle. Now you can adjust what this critical angle is, like the fact that this surface here doesn't need support, but this surface over here does. And that's where you see overhang support angle. By default, it's 50 degrees. So say your printer is really good at printing overhangs, you might be able to bump that up to 60, maybe 65 degrees, which means it'll only support things that are really close to horizontal like this. So in this model we don't need any of that, so I'm going to turn the support material off. And the next thing I want to talk about is build plate adhesion, which is critical. You really want to have a nice footprint when you print something. So on its edge you'll see that the footprint is very tiny. Just these lines right here are the actual corner of the cube. So let me lay it flat. I will rotate this back down. There it is. And all of a sudden we have this huge footprint, which is really nice. Let's see what it looks like from the bottom. There we go. All of this. You might notice this ring. This ring is called a skirt, and that's always printed first. If I go down to the first layer and hit play, that's what the whole first layer looks like. But the printer starts not by printing the object, but by printing some lines around it. And this is useful because it helps to get the filament flowing nice and smooth and consistently before it actually starts working on the part, so that the bottom of your part looks nice and smooth. Then it starts working on the actual object. So let's talk about the different options here. Just going to change the view. So there it is. There's our object. So this is a skirt. If the object has a nice big footprint like we see here, you really don't need any extra adhesion. Just doing a skirt to help get the filament flowing really nice before you start working on it is all you really need. If for some reason it has a small footprint and you want to make it a little bit bigger, let's go to build plate adhesion. You can use something called a brim. And a brim is kind of like this, except it fills in these middle lines right here all the way so that it's touching. And again, it works from the outside and goes in. I'll show you what that looks like. Around the outside, and eventually works its way concentrically towards the inside. I like this one a lot. This is good because this little thin layer down here on the bottom peels off pretty easily. You just grab it with your fingers and peel it right along this edge, and it comes off. Occasionally there might be a little part you have to cut off or sand off, but this comes off surprisingly easily, and it makes a huge footprint, as you can see from the bottom. It takes the entire thing. Huge footprint. Might be overkill. Be careful, because sometimes if the footprint's too big, it can be too difficult to remove the part from the print bed, and you end up yanking on it enough that you have to re-level the bed. So there that is. And then the other option is called a raft. And just like a life raft that you float on top of, your build piece floats on top of a raft. There's tons of settings. Most of them you can leave them default. But you'll notice that there's this little raft underneath here. And here's the first layer. It lays these lines down, some of them really wide at first, to help get good build plate adhesion. If you're having trouble with build plate adhesion, like your first layers aren't sticking or they're peeling up, you can try doing a raft, but the best thing to do is actually re-level your build plate. That's the most important thing. But this can help. So it lays these lines down first, back and forth, before it starts actually working on the object. So it's skipping layers on me. So if I can't get to layer 3 if I scroll. So there's 2, and then it jumps to 5. 1, 2, 4. So I really want to see layer 3. So I can just click there, type in 3, and hit enter. Hopefully. 3, enter. There we go. So that's the top of the raft. And then when I type in 4, you'll see that it's now working on that cube. You can see that. So there's 3, the top of the raft is done. And then 4, it starts to actually build this cube. And then this peels off. Depending on the material, this might get stuck on there pretty well. I've had that happen. Most of the time it comes off pretty nicely. But this is useful sometimes. Let's go back to the skirt, because that's all we need. Nice big footprint on this box. and we just want to get the filament flowing nicely. You can adjust the number of lines. I like 2 or 3 lines of filament that it draws. Like say you want to have just 1 line. It'll draw just a single line around the outside. Like that. And you can adjust how far away from the box it is. That's 3 millimeters away. And that corresponds to the 3 millimeters that you kind of lose of your build volume. So that number could be as small as 1. So I'll change that to 1, and I'll change that back to 3 lines. And now it's a little closer. The printer has insane precision. I mean, a millimeter of distance is a mile to the precision of a 3D printer. And there you can see the 3 lines. Now they're just a little bit closer, but still plenty of separation. And then there is this orange box. This is the minimum length. So if you add up the distance when it's drawing these 3 lines all the way around, you can set that it has to be a certain minimum. Like say the minimum for some reason was 500 millimeters. That's a long distance, which means this would have to draw a lot of lines around here. And that's just at kind of a minimum to get the filament flowing, so that added more lines. I don't really care what the minimum is. It doesn't bother me. 55, it doesn't matter. As long as it gives me my 3 lines around the object and they're 3 millimeters from the object. Love that. So back to the coin trap. We're going to try to trap a coin in here. So as this thing prints, we're going to try to sneak in, say, a quarter or a nickel. So here it is laying down the first layer, excuse me. And then as it builds up, when it gets about halfway there, say about this point, when it's printing one of these back pillars, at this point it looks like a pillar, we're going to try to sneak in a quarter or a nickel and drop it in there, and then it's going to finish printing and then wrap things up. Remember that you need to let the build plate cool down before you try to pry the part off. It'll come off a lot easier when it's cooler. So we need to save this file. It's all good to go. Everything looks nice big footprint. Builds up. It's set to 50% infill in here. Everything looks good. So let's save this. If we click File, Save As, by default, Cura wants to save it as a 3MF file, but we need G-code. So if we hit the Dropbox, we can change that to G-code, and we'll see that on our USB drive, or our SD card for the printer, there's already a file called Auto00, and that's the file that the printer looks for to print. There's no screen, it just looks for this file, and that's what it prints. And you can see that it's a G-code file. So we can either type in Auto00 down here and hit save and overwrite, or an easy way to change this name is to just left click this name one time. That saves this little typing. Then we hit save. And you know you've done it right if it asks, it already exists, do you want to overwrite it? Yes, we do. Wait for it to save, and then we can pull the SD card out, and that goes into our printer right here with the gold facing up. Put the SD card in, then turn it on, then tap this button one time. It'll flash a couple times, then go solid blue, and it seems like nothing's happening, but it's warming up the build plate and the extruder to start the print. Watch that first layer. That is the most important layer. If something weird happens, you can tap this button once to pause it and lift the print head. This usually takes a while, so you press it and then it usually continues to print for 5 to 10 seconds and then slowly lifts the print head up. And once it lifts the print head up, that's a good time to turn the power off so the print head's out of the way and you can easily peel off that material and start it again. And I think that's all.